This Beatport Top 10 house track is insane and has been called a masterclass in blending vintage soul with modern dance floor energy. But is it possible for even beginner producers to easily achieve this level of polish, groove, and quality? So in this video, we'll be making a modern house tune inspired by Alessi and Chloé Caillet's song, The One. And we're gonna find out if we can do this in under 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of music production. What you're listening to is the finished song we'll be breaking down today. This tune only took me about 6 hours to finish, completely arranged, mixed, mastered, and ready to be used in DJ sets and sent out to record labels. After having produced music for over 15 years, this is easily the fastest and best way I've come across. You can download this video's project files, as well as over 30 full project files inspired by Beatport Top 100 songs, with new files being added weekly. Just visit the link on screen or in the description. And if finishing songs super fast like this is something you'd like help with, you can also download a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song per week. But for now, let's start with the first of the 4 quick and easy steps we'll be covering today. First, make sure your song is inspired by the quality of a professional example by choosing a reference track. But stop yourself from straight up copying your reference by having a new hook to focus on. All right, so for each one of my projects, I like to make a project file page like this to kind of act as a guide so you can see all the details of making a song like this in a little bit more detail. And so when it came to choosing the reference track and the remix track, once again, I did not choose this by myself. And once again, I'm joined with my friend Sam, who's also a subscriber and goes by DJ Filthy. Say hi.
Hello, guys.
So walk us through kind of like the little journey that we took to get to these 2 tunes here.
Yeah, sure. So we decided to enter a remix contest. This one is on skio.com. And the song that is to be remixed for the contest is Flight Facilities Crave You. And then when I was looking for songs to act as the reference track, initially I found one, Lose My Mind by Block and Crown, but after reviewing everything and working with Matt, we ended on, at that time, the second song in the Beatport Top 100 called The One by Jocelyn Brown, Luke Alessi, and Chloé Caillet.
Yeah, so I think we had like the Block and Crown one in mind first, and kind of like chatted about it beforehand. And then I think the day of that, we actually started working on the tune, once we started loading everything up. I remember you had, it was cool because I remember you had that like also downloaded and ready to go just in case. And so we threw them both in there, and we just kind of did what you're about to see, where we had the isolated vocal and kind of started playing around with it, overlapping it over top of the references. We tried it with both tunes, and then this one just was hitting
instantly. Instantly we knew that was the right one.
Yeah, and it just sounded really good. And then I think in terms of the theory too, it was pretty simple. So if we open up the theory sheet, really quickly here, the reference track here is in the key of A sharp minor, and the remix hook there is in D flat minor. So they're both in minor keys, which is helpful. And I think there's actually not too big of a distance in terms of the 2 keys there. So we open up the theory cheat sheet here. A sharp minor is right here, and then D sharp minor is also C sharp minor right here. The distance in keys is just 1, 2, 3 semitones, which isn't quite a lot. So I think when we were playing around with like overlapping the vocal on top of the reference, we just pitched up the vocal a little bit to have it so we could hear how it sounds over top of the reference. And then I believe when we actually started working on the tune, the vocal sounds cool, but it's quite poppy. And having the vocal pitched up 3 semitones made it like way too poppy. So what we ended up doing is leaving the vocal at C sharp, and then we just brought up adjusted the bass line and changed the reference track so it was playing to the right key in the remix there. So simple stuff there. All we had to do was just pitch up the key a little bit. And then in terms of the BPM, we're looking between 120 on the remix and 130 on the reference. Not too big of a jump. Any too larger and you might get into like that chipmunk effect, but in this case we were definitely in good shape. And ended up turning out pretty well. So we're excited to kind of jump into Ableton now and show you the detailed process of how we built this out. All right, so here's a look at the project file after just 30 minutes of production time. And so what we did here, the goal was to quickly prepare our template to a professional level and to create the first draft that we can then build off of, and then use AI to speed up the process. So let's give you a quick little taster of what that sounded like. So one of the first things we did is we dropped the song that we wanted to sample into our track. And because we were doing a remix contest, we didn't have to use AI to separate the vocal out. We just had to grab the slice that we wanted to use. And so that just sounded a little bit like this.
Why can't you want me like the other boys do? They stare at me while I stare at you.
And then what we did is we dropped the song that we wanted to reference into the project, into an audio track as well. And so that is right here, and it sounds like this. And we set it up so that the track is disabled here, and we can press the S key on our keyboard to flick between it to solo it. So we can flick between the reference and what we're working on to kind of build everything out. Then what we did is we mapped out all the main sections of the song using empty MIDI clips to create an arrangement track right here up at the top. And then what we did is we found a loop of the song, kind of the area where it's the busiest of the reference. There's as many layers that we can dissect as possible. And then we use AI to extract out all of the stems of that reference. And what we did on this AI drum bit here is we just used an EQ to cut out a bunch of the low end, to basically remove the kick and turn this drum loop into a top loop essentially. And so that sounds like this. And then we took a slice of the kick drum from that AI drum loop and dropped it into this plugin here called Drum Clone. And what it does is it resynthesizes that audio sample to turn it into a fully synthesized kick drum. So at first the audio sample sounds like this. So you can hear there's a bunch of artifacts and like hi-hats and other stuff kind of like that going on in that sound. And then it resynthesizes it so it sounds like this. So it's a completely synthesized kick that sounds very much like it, which is super useful. And then we kind of kept the processing pretty minimal. We shelved out a bit of the highs to get rid of a bit of that knock. And then we threw on some drum bus here, mostly just adding in this boom here, which adds in a little bit of the kind of like a nice thicker low end subbiness to the kick. But really the main thing that we focused on was flicking back and forth between the reference and what we have to volume match that kick drum. And I should mention we did the same thing with that AI drum loop as well. We just, other than removing some of the low end, we just volume matched it so that it sounded similar as possible in volume to the reference track. And then what we did is there was also an AI bass that we extracted as well. So this sounds like this. And so what we did then is we grabbed that AI separated bass. And when you drop that onto an empty MIDI clip, it'll then trigger Ableton's audio to MIDI functionality. And if you select the melody function, it'll somewhat turn that audio into MIDI. So you can see it here. It's pretty close, and it seems to actually be getting better, which is really awesome. And this is a look at the pattern that we have here. What we did is just kind of cleaned up the MIDI a little bit, tightened it up a bit, and then had it playing pretty nice. So what it sounded like is this. And what we did for the sound of this is we started off with this sub, basically just a very simple sine wave. With some options to add in some saturation. We dialed in that sub low end first, flicking back and forth to the reference and what we're working on to really get that low end tight. And then we layered in a bass guitar sound. So it's a nice bass guitar sample that I like to use. And so what we're doing is this bass grouping method where we can route the MIDI in from this sub layer into another MIDI track without having to duplicate everything over. And so we just need to adjust the pitch a little bit so it's playing well to this sound. And then we're just removing a little bit of the low end so that way the sub is taking care of it. And the mid is mostly just focusing on sound design and vibe and groove. If you want to learn more about this, there's a bass grouping method YouTube tutorial that I put out that goes into this in more detail if you want to set this up yourself. And then basically what we did then is then adjusted that bass line that we have here to play nicely with the vocal that we have. We want to adjust it so that it's in service of this new hook. And that also helps it then start to move into a more unique, interesting territory and less like a carbon copy of the original. So let's have a listen to what it ended up sounding like at the end of this 30-minute session.
You want me like the other boys do. They stare at me while I stare at you. Can I keep you safe?
So sounds pretty sick there, I would say. A couple things that I want to show off before we move on to what we did in the next session is I also threw in this cool little vocal throw thing. I'm going to make a tutorial on this soon. The idea is you can take like a little slice of the vocal, put it onto this track here, and when you have a delay that's set to 100% with a feedback very high, it'll catch that that vocal and then create a really cool kind of echoey kind of sound like this, which I think sounds really interesting and kind of makes the track sound more full. It's like a cool way to almost have like a pad-ish layer while using an element within your own tune. And the other thing I do want to show off too is in the vocal here, we're moving a bit of the lows, and then also throw in this auto shift. I'm going to make a dedicated tutorial on this as well at some point, but the idea is when you set up an auto shift and you have an LFO mapped to the formant, it kind of slowly pitches the vocal up and down without it going out of key too much because it's moving the formant, and it makes it sound a little bit more interesting. So one thing that we were struggling with is we were like, yo, the vocal sounds too poppy and kind of lame. It's what we were almost thinking in a way by itself. And so by adding in this cool, slowly moving formant shifting kind of sound, it ended up making it sound a little more underground and interesting. And so basically the idea here is within just about 30 minutes of producing, we're able to quickly create like a playground of sounds that we have here. So we have like a drum loop already really quickly. We have the bass line working well with the vocals. And now we can really focus on the melodic elements. And I choose to always want to work on the melodic elements first, because this is going to be really the idea is to fail fast and fail often. So usually the melodic stuff is where it might not be playing well with the vocal. Maybe the bass line that you like from the reference actually doesn't work with the vocal. Everything's not actually sounding good. It's incoherent. You got to end the idea. At least you can find that within 30 minutes. If you go into actually fully developing the drum loop and all that, it might be like a couple hours of production and then you find out that the song doesn't work. That's kind of a problem. So the idea is to quickly create your own little playground, figure out if it works or not. And then that way it also, because we're setting up our template in this particular way with like the arrangement track, we're going to be able to finish the track very quickly as well. So here's a look at the project file after our second call and about 2 or so hours into the production. Our goal here was to expand our draft loop into a finished loop quickly by using 80-20 reference techniques and mixing as you go with a customized channel strip. So the trick here is to just flick back and forth between what you are working on and the reference. And you want to focus on each layer from what you hear to be the most important to the least important. And the main thing I like to do is start with each layer by first working on the pattern, then getting the sound selection right, and then finally doing a nice volume match. And throughout this whole process, what I like to use is a little channel strip here. So let me actually unfreeze this. And the channel strip that I usually do is just an EQ like this. And right over here, this little V strip mini here, where the main thing is that we're controlling the low end and the high end with the EQ. And then we're adjusting the transient, attack, and sustain, usually tightening up the sustain to make things a bit punchier and tighter. And then maybe adding some saturation and a little bit of width, and then just using some one knob sidechain for that pumping and making room for the kick kind of effect. So like I've been mentioning, the first thing we like to do is, although we have the drums here, what we worked on first was the melodics. The main reason is, again, we want to fail fast and work on the melodics first to make sure everything is working. And that way, if it's not working, we can finish the song and move on to something else faster before we've sunk too much time into it. In this instance, what we did is a little bit of, some might call it cheating, but I have no shame in this game. What we did is Sam actually found a remake of a project file of the Alessi tune there. And what we did is we grabbed some MIDI and sounds from that. In particular, we found this kind of like bass pluck kind of sound here. So it's kind of like really bouncing off the bass line, I felt. Really cool stuff. Basically what we did here is we dropped this into our project file and then we just adjusted the notes so that it was in the right key for us. And then we just played around with the MIDI note so it was similar to it and started to move into a little bit of a new direction and played more with our actual hook. In terms of the sound design, it's using some kind of serum bass pluck preset. No idea. I actually did create it. Just removing some of the low end here, removing some of the mids to make room for some of that. I think Sam added in this reverb and echo here. And then with this, the channel strip here, we were just adding some one-knob sidechain, a little bit of the width. So we're pushing it to the left and right, making stuff room for everything down the middle. And then the next element that we added in was this kind of like, sort of like this like strings, keys kind of sound here. Let's play it. I'll show you. So again, we grabbed this bit from that like other remake, and then we just adjusted the notes so that they were playing a little bit more to what we had going on in terms of the processing. What's going on here that's interesting. Just a little bit of EQ here, and then some standard channel strip stuff here. So we're pumping a little bit with sidechain, a little bit of the width. Nothing too crazy really going on here. Then what we did is started adding in a bit of extra elements to kind of make things a bit more unique. And start pushing into a bit more different territory, kind of going for a more spacey vibe is what I would describe it as. And so what we added in was this kind of like Afro housey kind of stab thing. So what that is like kind of following that same kind of rhythm of that you hear a lot in like the Alessi tune. And what we're using is Synthplant here. So what I did is I grabbed like a slice from the audio extract of the synth from the Alessi tune, the reference track, and then use Synthplant to recreate it using like AI essentially. Removing it from the lows, adding into this kind of acid distortion to make it punch a little bit more, make it sound a little bit more interesting, a little bit of sidechain, dialing back the sustain a lot so it's quite tight. It's a very subtle layer that's just adding a little bit to everything else. And then we have this more ravey kind of stab thing, or pluck rather. And so for this, the MIDI pattern we found by dragging the audio sample into the MIDI track here. And then in terms of the sound design, we have this Synthplant again. So I grabbed a little slice from the AI separated keyboard part and then use Synthplant to recreate it somewhat similar. I feel like the cool thing about Synthplant is it never is quite exactly like the original at all. Well, it is, but it ends up being more unique and interesting, which is kind of what I like to go for. And we just attach this LFO so it's adjusting the release. So it's getting tighter and more opened up throughout the arrangement. And then also the effect that's being applied is becoming less and more intense. So there's like slowly an evolving sound happening there. We're just removing some of the lows, removing some of the highs, a little bit of sidechain, just dialing back the sustain so it's a bit of a tighter sound. And then added in this kind of like string sound, which is kind of like just very subtle, but let me play it for you. So it's kind of like very orchestral kind of thing going on here. We added in some A1 trigger gate with this preset that kind of adds like an echo stutter house kind of effect, removing some of the lows, a little bit of sidechain, a little bit of width. And I think that's a pretty good look at what we had going on there. I think really the main thing is to hear all these things together. Oh, we did also add in this house string here, which is just a single house string that's playing basically infinity wise. And this is a really great way that you can add a lot of extra energy to a drop and to your loop in general, and have this kind of come in and out throughout the arrangement. And then we have the vocal throw already in there as well. And let me just play all of the melodic stuff together so you can kind of hear how everything kind of works and bounces off of each other. So you can hear it sounds quite a lot like the reference, but then it's starting to sound more spacey and a little bit more different. And especially then when you play that on top of the vocal, it starts to really take on its own character. To this point, we had like a solid kick. We had the top loop from the AI, so we had like a drum loop that was playing nicely, and we had these new melodic elements that were playing nicely against the vocal. So we knew that we were in pretty good shape. So at this point, we were able to then recreate the drums, and let's kind of just go through that. So the idea again is like kind of flick back and forth to the reference and what you're working on, and kind of listen to what elements you're hearing the loudest. And so what we had first, and actually this is really cool because I showed Sam how to do this and Sam took care of this, but I'll walk you through kind of the process. So the first thing is he had some claps. He put them on 2 different channels. I usually like to put them all within one drum rack, but this definitely works as well. So we have 2 claps first. Classic is just playing like on the kind of one. He adjusted the note position so it's off just a little bit, so it sounds a little bit more humanized. Then what we have here is he added in this cool little reverse hit that happens every once in a while. So cool way to just make it so that sounds like that's slowly evolving and changing over time. It's kind of a really cool ear candy thing. In terms of any processing, very similar stuff you're going to see throughout the whole thing, but it's just standard channel strip mixing as you go. So we're removing some of the lows. And then a big thing here is usually dialing back some of the sustain for these drum hits. Usually tighter sounds a lot more professional. Then what we have here is a snare. So I'll listen to that. And again, the idea here is what I like to do a lot is have like the claps nice and wide left and right, and then the snare down the middle, and all together it creates a nice cohesive sound. Sounding pretty sick. And then what we have is the open hat was the next loudest thing and most important thing that we could hear. Just playing on the offbeat there. In terms of any processing, there's probably very little going on here. We're just removing some of the lows, dialing back the sustain a little bit. Again, main thing with all of this is flicking back and forth to your reference after you've got the pattern, and then you've selected the right sound that sounds similar to the reference. Dialing in that volume is going to be the main thing. The next thing we added in were these closed hats. So what we have here is like the closed hat that's kind of reinforcing the hit on the of the open hat, and then some additional notes here, adding a little bit of groove and shuffle with like a little fill-ish one going on here. And there's a little bit of like velocity changes going on, so it's kind of sounding a bit more humanized and interesting. We also have this ride that comes in through some of the tune as well. Just adding a little bit more energy. This is usually more of an arrangement trick. What you can do is have like the closed hat, then you introduce the open hat, and then you can introduce the ride. And this is a way for you to step up the energy and have things evolve and change throughout the arrangement, which we'll talk about more in a second. Then the idea here is then what we have is this pretty solid drum group here with our core hits being played by one shots. And then the idea is then we can then layer in a bunch of different top loops and drum breaks and nestle them in underneath our core hits to add a bit more groove and humanization and interest to the beat. So if we listen to the drums by themselves at this point, just solo everything and also grab the kick here, it sounds a little bit like this. Which is okay. It's not super interesting yet. And that's where we can really get that going with these top loops. So the first one we added was this. So this is a little adding more kind of groove in like the kind of the hi-hat kind of area. Something I like to do a lot with these top loops is set the clip to beats and on transients, and then have when the arrow's pointing to the right, you can dial this back here. And that's similar to that sustain on that channel strip. It's going to tighten up the sounds a lot, and that's going to help it nestle in a lot more with those core hits. In terms of any processing, just removing a bit of EQ. Main thing is just dialing this in to like nestle in underneath our core hits. Next element we added in was this drum loop here. So again, main thing here is kind of adding in reinforcing more of the open hat. There's a little bit of close hi-hat in there as well. That's adding a bit of groove and shuffle to things. Tightening things up with the clip trick, and then just removing a bit of the lows. The next element that we added in was this. This is adding a little bit to the kick, a little bit to the snare, but main thing is adding a bit more shuffle and groove and interest to the closed hats there. And then the last one that we added in was this. Which is adding a lot more energy within the hats, but it's definitely adding in a little bit more to where it comes down to some of the snares, and there's like actual snare fills and stuff like that going in. So now let's have a listen to the drums all together. You can hear that sounds a lot more interesting, a lot more full. Let's hear it now with the bass. Let's add the melodic elements. Let's add in the melodic elements. And then let's add the vocals. So it's starting to sound pretty full and interesting here. So the idea is to work on the melodics first. We want to fail first and fail fast if we can. Really get this to make sure that it's all working well. And then what we can do is a lot of 80-20 referencing. So flicking back and forth, trying to get that to sound similar to the professional standard of the reference. And then mixing as we go, mostly focusing on the volumes, but then doing a little bit of some channel strip processing as well. And then quickly going through the drums then, once we know that everything is sounding good, knowing that we can use these techniques to recreate the drums pretty quickly and faithfully. And the idea here is that we get a pretty fast and pro sounding tune because we're using AI and referencing and all these interesting techniques and doing that to a professional standard, which we have this reference track here. And now we have a nice solid loop that we're going to be able to use and very quickly turn this into a arranged track because we've done this extra work with the arrangement track and we have the reference track all set up. And so now it's going to be a pretty quick process to actually turn this into a finished song. All right, so here's a look at the project file after our third call and about 3, 4, maybe 5 hours of production. So our goal in this session was to quickly turn our loop into a finished song by quickly getting a rough structure done in under 10 minutes, focusing on creating tension and release between each transition and adding polish with special effects. So what we essentially did to start this off is we moved our core loop over to the final drop of the tune. And we were able to quickly do this because we used this arrangement track up here at the top. And the idea is we have this main drop here, or this final drop. And this way we can tell that all roads are leading to this last bit of the drop here. And that sounds a little bit like this. And so we had it, so it started without the vocal. I'm just going to turn down the master just a little bit. And then had it, so then it slowly filtered in. And then the payoff actually came halfway through. That ended up being more of an arrangement choice, but basically what we did is, say we started it here. We had this main core loop here, and what we basically just did very simply is we used each of these parts of our tune as puzzle pieces. So we have like the kick drum, the bass, drums, and all the melodic elements. And what we did is we just copied everything over and used the arrangement track and a reference track as a guide for us to find out what needs to be in each section. So we would listen to we know that this area here is the intro, so we would listen to this. If I skip through it. And then go to the end. And so the idea here is we can then use our pieces as puzzle pieces and then figure out what we need to have in there. We have also the kick and some of the melodic elements. And just add some more elements in. So the sub came in here. We ended up having it so that there was a kind of a verse here. But the idea here is you can quickly kind of just use this method. So just using the arrangement track and the reference track and using your loop as puzzle pieces to quickly create a quick structure across the entire track. And you can do this within like 10 minutes or so because you can almost kind of blindly do it and just check your reference really quickly to just get a good idea of what layers are present. And then really the main kind of effort here comes into creating tension and release by reducing the energy at these kind of sections just before each new section by delayering or filtering. So what do I mean by that? Usually the first thing we'll do is to make the next part hit a bit harder is instead of having more elements play in this new part, you can reduce the elements leading up to that. So perfect example here is this idea here of delayering. As you can see, we've removed a bit of the kick before the next section comes in, which sounds like this. Right here. So that drop in energy here creates some tension and then makes it feel the next part feel even more impactful. Some other things you can do is remove some of the low end is a really common technique. Something I like to do with that is with this high pass filter here. You can see right near the end here, we're slowly removing some of the lows, just like how like a DJ would. And this creates a bit more tension so that, again, the next part hits a little bit harder. And so the idea really is to kind of just go through each of these sections and listen to what's going on in the reference, and then kind of really paying attention to what's in this last bar, couple bars or so, leading up into the next section. Another thing that we did do is like try to make sure that something changes every 8 bars or so, particularly with like loopy music like this. So you can see here in the intro, we didn't have like the claps in the first 8 bars, then we introduced the claps, and then you can see then we added in open hats, little things you can do like that to just make sure that things are changing and evolving throughout the song. And then the last little bit of polish is adding in things like sound effects. So little things like, I'll just solo this group for you, crashes, reverse crashes, lasers, that kind of thing. So here's just a listen to the effects leading into one of these sections here. I usually like to do this as the last step. So first, kind of set up the arrangement by doing a blind quick structure, then pay attention to like the main sections before each section, use delayering and filtering. And then you can drop in a bunch of sound effects like this, reverse crashes, downlifters, sweeps, lasers, all those kind of things. Add them as a final finishing touch on the last pass of this kind of process. And really the main key here is to layer these in quite quiet in terms of like the volume. When these kind of sounds, especially like lasers and that kind of stuff, downlifters and risers, they can sound quite corny and cheesy and not that cool when they're mixed in really quietly, or really loud rather. When they're mixed in loud like that, they kind of become more important than your actual layers and your actual main hooks, and they take center stage, and that's when it sounds cheesy. The key is to layer them in quite quietly, and this way they're kind of supplementing and nestled underneath your main elements to give them a bit of lift and interest in these transitional sections. Another thing that I do like to do as well, I showed you this here, having like a little rack here where we can remove some of the low end, just like a DJ would. I usually just have some one knob effects, so you can do something like this. You can see here, we're just adding in some kind of like delay and reverb effect. It's like a one knob effect. This adds in kind of an automatic riser sound. And these are just kind of very similar to how like a DJ would kind of add in these master effects. You can do them as well, especially in your breaks and in transition points, to add a little bit more tension. So that way the release sounds really awesome and cathartic when it actually does hit. So the main thing here during this third kind of phase where we're doing a fast and deep structure is to do a quick structure, like I mentioned, using arrangement and your reference to quickly get something done very, very fast. Then dive in deeper, really focus on simple techniques like tension and release, and using some clever tricks like master effects and sound effects like that some people might overlook or think is cheesy, but doing it in a nuanced, simple kind of way to really elevate your song and get that extra little bit of polish. But then to finish the song, we mixed and mastered it in just under 20 minutes, because what we were doing is we were mixing as we were going by using that custom channel strip that I showed you and that 80-20 mixing process, which I show in more detail in this video right here. So this way our song was already about 80% done, even though we didn't do any traditional mixing yet. And then what we did is we quickly used some bus processing on our groups and use a special mastering chain, which I show in more detail in this video right here, which is mostly just a little bit of compression and some clipping on those groups, and then using that mastering chain, like I said, to quickly get that extra 19.9% of polish. So if you want to take a look at this project file in more detail or grab anything you want from it to speed up your own projects, click the link in the description or on screen now to get access to over 30 project files, with new project files being added weekly. Also, anyone who grabs the free toolkit that I mentioned will also get access to the project file pages and video tutorials that I showed you earlier, which you can also find in the link in the description. And if you want to stay here on YouTube, just right here, you'll also find a playlist with all the videos that I was mentioning in the description as well. With that said, I hope you found this useful, and let's do a quick recap of the 80-20 rule so you can apply what you've learned here to your own productions as quickly as possible. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here, and if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.